Originally produced by our team at Ingenuity Radio in 2002, Searching for the New Liberalism is a 9-part series adapted for this podcast, The Life of a Servant.
Welcome to Part 3. This segment features a lively discussion about Canadian culture, cohesion, and what is needed to connect Canadians.
How topic is, I think that it's written is culture, cohesion, and connecting Canadians. And the part that I'm supposed to talk about is cohesion. It doesn't necessarily fit all that logically with the culture part. I'm going to try and tap on dance on tables to provide a story at the end. But the social cohesion issue is connected in my mind as well with political integration, which is what I see federalism in both Canada and Europe. And so social cohesion and political integration are how I'm going to try and get to where we end up with cultural connectivity. And the first one I do is just reinforce something that John said this morning about liberalism and its terms of the individual, and how that led to things like programs to support equality of opportunity, tolerance of diversity, fairness, and equitable treatment. Because that resulted in politics of cohesion and social solidarity as well, particularly in the Canadian case. And I think while since the Second World War that was epitomized in Canada by the welfare state, as many people pointed out, something that occurred elsewhere in the Russian Liberal Democratic world. Virtually everybody adopted some version of the welfare state. What was unique about Canada was the federal impact, which produced things like equalization and equal development. And so that's how federalism is connected to the social cohesion model. And perhaps we'll also address some of the concerns that John Duffy raised, particularly consideration for those permeated. So in the liberal model, the government programs and initiatives were justified not simply on the basis of altruism, which is a mistake that a number of analysts of liberalism have made in the past, but instead, as Robert Rice and John Kenneth Galbraith have pointed out recently, they demonstrated that both programs were in everyone's best interest, and their long-term best interest, and so they all bought into it, including, of course, the middle class. And hence, programs had universality in terms of social cohesion in the welfare state. Now, the other issue is political integration, which, of course, is something that all states have to achieve. But in Canada's case, again, we were somewhat different. We were a distinctly plural society. We were large geographically, sparse population, all sorts of things, which produced our decision to go with a federal model. But political integration requires more than some kind of political model. It also requires an overarching national identity. And you can do that in a variety of ways. All states tend to do it first and foremost by a number of things that are symbolic, anthems and flags and so on, which we in Canada were noticeably very, very late in achieving. In fact, it was 100 years before we got much of what would normally be considered the trappings of national identity. But other ways you do that are through programs and policies. And what Michael Ignatius has called the civic culture, civic nationalism to overarch the ethnic nationalism that often happens in other plural societies. So, in our federal system, we also, along with the federal system, we also introduced over time concepts like official languages, multiculturalism, and a Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Now, having achieved basically an element of social justice and political integration in Canada, which everybody referred to as the successful or golden era, depending on which era that was, we've undoubtedly gone through 20 years of regression, so to speak, in which what Robert Rice calls the liberal parable has been overturned, or regarded or misunderstood or has failed. And the reason for that, I would argue, are two separate phenomena, which again have been discussed this morning at some length. One, what has come to be called popularly neoconservatism, which essentially set up an alternative parable of explaining society. And it had an alternative set of values and beliefs, which are not necessarily well explained, but the parable of the explanation of society, what was wrong with liberalism, was extremely successful. Of course, it also supports the notion of the importance of the individual, but the big point about, liberalism and conservatism, as it's now called, is that the other side of the coin isn't there. You don't need government intervention. You don't need any programs to ensure equality of opportunity because you have this Darwinian view of the world. And that is around politics of altruism. You don't encourage individuals in society to have any kind of social solidarity. You don't tell them about your long-term best interests. Instead, you produce a very divisive society. And that's exactly what we have. And two things have happened because of that. One is what Chavez calls the culture of contentment, or Christopher Lack has referred to as the revolt of the elite. The people who succeeded in the Darwinian view of the world in the last 20 years will often do their thing. Some of them decided that 40s didn't matter in the global era, and they perceived themselves as having been the reason for their success, not the state. And they ignored all of the social safety nets that had produced the conditions in which they were able to succeed. And at the same time, of course, those people who failed blamed the state. And this leads to the other point, the other issue, other than neoconservatism, which is globalization. And globalization encouraged, particularly those people who failed, to feel that the state was impotent. The program had failed, and in fact, there was nothing that politicians could do to fix this up. So those two things together have produced a situation in which you have massive lack of participation in the political system in virtually all Western liberal democracies. Declining rates of participation, but also cynicism and some participation in alternative formats. So you see the culture has been replaced by the vocabulary of neoconservatism, which talks about taxpayers rather than citizens, or consumers rather than citizens. And it talks about individuals rather than the role of the state, and certainly it never talks about public good. Now, enough of all of that theory. I'm rapidly closing in on what the right thing is. What is the big picture goal? Is I think truthfully liberals need to address this phenomenon directly. Whatever programs and policies are discussed over the next 2 days in terms of new issues that are able to be addressed or new solutions, approaches and technologies for addressing them, I think one thing that does have to happen is that liberals have to reassert the liberal paradigm. Maybe they need a new discourse to do it, but they absolutely need to reassert it. There's nothing wrong with the underlying values and beliefs, as several people have already said, but they definitely need to tackle head-on the neoconservative discourse rather than being apologetic about it. So then goals and objectives have to be clearly defined, and you need a coherent, overarching theme for whatever initiative you undertake. And one source for that, I think, might be Europe, where attempts to unify and achieve political integration, coming so much later than our own, are encountering many of the same problems that we've already addressed. And so Europe looks to Canada and pays attention to our multiculturalism and our fiscal bilingualism and a variety of other things. At the same time, however, Europe was the home of both the welfare state and original liberalism. So it's not a bad idea to look at how they're handling some other issues. They also have got the trends growing gap in terms of the diversity of population because of immigration, but they also have a growing gap economically. And their attempt to achieve economic integration has been a big success. Their attempt to achieve political integration, as anybody who writes about that will show you, has been a big failure. So much so that Francois Mitterrand, when discussing, and he was president not only of France, but also where he had the rotating chair of the European Union, said that Europe will have failed, I'm quoting now directly, Europe will have failed if the benefits of economic integration are not shared at all. This led the European Union to set up things like the Stability and Growth Pact to try and counter some of the economic diversity that was occurring, but it also led them to set up something called a Social Cohesion Commission. And that commission said, and I'll quote again, social cohesion is an essential element to democratic security and stability. It is one of the foremost needs of the wider Europe in order to promote human rights, dignity, and individual worth. Well, in this context, a number of things have happened in Europe. They've got this convention on the future of Europe that they're discussing, and so on. One of them is that they're talking about a social charter. And a social charter is something they already have informally, but the notion of inventing it in the Constitution is what they're looking at. And I tried to do, I realized that this was originally suggested by someone from another political party named Bob Ray many years ago, but I think the notion of the social charter, some people have already been discussing this in terms of health care and a health charter for Canadians. I think a broader social charter might not be a bad idea. It's something that liberals could use to communicate values and beliefs to this broader public. Another point I want to make, however, about Europe is that the social cohesion to me has made it very clear that they view social cohesion as the sine qua non, so to speak, not economic growth. Europe, having started out working on economic integration, is now focusing much more on political integration, and the people running it, such as Romano Prodi and Pat Cox, have said repeatedly that economic growth is the means to achieve a better quality of life and social cohesion. It's not the other way around. And I think sometimes we forget that when we talk about our culture. Jill, what have you done with your home? I think the Cohesion government has done an excellent job in starting to remove the public beliefs in the welfare state and in social justice and in many of the elements of social cohesion. Then also child benefits and women scholarships are obvious examples of that. I'm sure that in the next few days you'll hear about a national child care plan, a pharmacy plan, a home care plan. Some of the things I might have been talking about if I didn't in that panel. But all of these programs have to be presented within the context of an overarching liberal set of values and beliefs, which is telling the people how it's in everybody's best interest to achieve these things, rather than a neoconservative approach of dividing it up into groups. A national child care program is not simply cost-efficient ad or good business sense, and it's not good for people with children, it's for everybody. And at the same thing, it can be used to discuss pharmacy or home care. But all Canadians ultimately benefit from establishing these programs, which, by the way, of course, are already common in Europe. And last but not least, in terms of political integration, I think that the issue, and again, speaking as a Westerner, there are a number of polls which demonstrate this. The rest of us who are alienated so much as it feels neglected in a variety of ways, and it doesn't see itself reflected back. And we could talk about the role of the media on this. We could certainly talk about the CDC. You could talk about initiatives like the broadband initiative, which I'm a big supporter of, and which I think not only brings together the social cohesion issues that are strong to rural and Aboriginal communities, but also the national identity issues. So, I guess, now sticking quickly and going through a number of things, the last point I want to make is about political participation in terms of social cohesion and national identity. If the institutions that are going to balance about aren't credible, it isn't going to happen. Roy started to address this, and I just want to throw my 2 cents in about the need to have credible institutions that appear to be relevant, and whether that is going to be in the long term things like electoral reform and Senate reform, or whether in the short term it should deal primarily with things like ethics and perhaps more visibility and more participation at different levels of the House of Commons and the Senate in the decision-making process, more partnerships with the voluntary sector. All of those things are possibilities, but unless the institutions are credible, people won't believe the message. Certainly, Brian Mulroney learned that message very clearly. So last but not least, in terms of communicating with people, I want to return to one of the traits when I was involved in government when Prime Minister Trudeau spoke to the nation and explained why he was trying to amend the Constitution and what was the purpose of having a chartered rights and an amending formula and so on. He went over the head of the provinces to the people, he thought, and it was hugely effective, and everybody bought into it because of that. So, I conclude by quoting someone who was a long time ago called A.D. Dicey, who said that the role of politicians and legislators is not just to legislate, but to educate and legitimate. Well, that's what I conclude to the beginning. Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation, Hal. And I'm going to focus in on just one area of this business of culture cohesion and connectivity amongst Canadians. And I'm going to talk about the pillars of our culture, but I also want to say there's always been a discussion about the nature of the definition of culture in Canada. And I want to also include amateur sports and the whole sports infrastructure, because that particular infrastructure reaches into every tiny community in this country. And when it is built and it is thriving, it also reaches out to other parts of the world and represents us throughout the world. So they're part of our culture. But let me say, I'm not a politician, I'm not an economist, I'm not an academic, I don't run an NGO or a research house. I've been on the ground liberal all my life, albeit not very active over the last 15 or 20 years. And I would admit to my 6 years of a working life, straddling most of the cultural industries, which is a term I've grown to despise. Right? And that's everything from magazine publishing, book publishing, private television, sound recording, and latterly to the wired world, where I helped DCE launch their simpatico internet service across the country, which took us 3 years. And frankly, I'm not at all proud of our liberals and support of what I consider this particular sector. and I fail to see much of a commitment to the serious strengthening of our national identity and our sovereignty that goes along with it. As you're well aware, a nation's cultural output, a nation's identity, and a nation's sovereignty are all interlinked. When I examine more closely the identity question, I take a page of Naomi Klein's the logo. And I looked at Canada as one would look at a commercial brand. And I asked myself, what really happened to this brand called Canada over the last half century? A brand that has been under our collective stewardship for about 75% of the time. To anyone who can see, hear, or indeed cares, the brand has been seriously degraded. And with it, a huge markup has occurred in our attitude toward and our support of our culture. A culture that lies at the very heart of this particular brand. And any brand that lacks nourishment, who becomes malnourished, and star declining to come to an inevitable end. Unfortunately, under our stewardship, we have through neglect, carelessness, disrespect, and insensitivity condoned a pattern of slow starvation. And I would suggest that that's been a serious violation of our duty as the voter-chosen supporters of our national identity and defenders of our national sovereignty. If we cannot support the basic pillars of our culture, we might as well forget about everything else, and maybe all we do is put a value on individual citizens, give them all $1 million, and say, okay, it's done, there's our deal. Hugh, would you take that deal? You would. Anyway, carelessness, insensitivity, a liberal party? No, our liberal party? I'm afraid so. Our devalued brand has suffered the indignity of lamely defended attacks from outside forces, namely the so-called friendly neighbor, who has degraded and come dangerously close to humiliating us on various trade and cultural issues, while removing millions of disposable dollars from our cultural and entertainment pots, movie box office, book cash registers, and pay-per-view television. It is also becoming increasingly clear that the osmotic effect of the American-led, what I consider untraceable globalization gallop, has tended to water down traditional, homegrown, private, and institutional financial support for cultural endeavors, and increasingly has placed a pall over a wide range of cultural initiatives. Has it continued to disenfranchise individuals and small businesses and distort fundamental human rights and destroy nations? Am I against globalization? No, I'm not against globalization. But what I am for is a principled globalization that respects human rights, that respects nations' rights, and respects nation culture. And that's important. This business of a paralyzed globalization is a term that was coined by a neighbor and friend of mine in Ireland, Mary Robinson, who's a senior youth United Nations. She was a senior United Nations Commissioner on Human Rights, and I think she was right on the money when she developed that idea. And from the inside, he also have presided over decades of political compromise, wanton neglect, and destruction to the financial starvation of so many pillars of our culture. From the inside, let me name a few. Our book industry is currently in tatters. A severe devastation with all the infrastructure dominoes falling as we speak. I wonder if any of our authors will ever see their hard-earned royalties this year, their only source of income. Our Gloss, NFB, our Famous, CBC, have all been starved by a succession of paranoid and insensitive political parties, including ours. Our film and television industries, especially on the English side, have spent hundreds upon hundreds of millions of dollars of direct taxpayer dollars, but huge tax concessions to produce shows and films that most Canadians refuse or are not encouraged to watch, that global markets will not buy, and that continue to make foreign co-production partners rich. The amount of money that goes into the pockets of caterers, location finders, technicians, drivers, and foreign producers, rather than to the pockets of our own creators, interpreters, and storytellers, would make you sick. We have created and funded a thriving commercial production industry that, excuse the expression, shines other people's kids, and have turned our backs on the way we created cultural funding mechanisms in the first place. Our dance, theater, orchestral opportunities continue to run on empty, on deficit budgets, exacerbated by miserly annual federal growth and a mountain of bureaucratic interference. Most of these infrastructures are functioning on a day-to-day basis, constantly on the base of bankruptcy, with afraid of people and processes squeezed to the point of near extinction. In the absence of sensitive, responsible, and responsive political leadership, layer upon layer of costly government bureaucracies and a plethora of cultural NGOs have emerged to adjudicate and represent the interests of these communities. Collectively, the staff of these NGOs continue to hold down salaries and expenses that, if not picking up already, would make you dead. And unbelievably, in order to access our public funds, these same cultural NGOs have been trained to justify to these same cultural bureaucracies the existence and output of the same cultural communities. How? By rationalizing only the economic benefits and forgetting, for the most part, the role that a vibrant, caring cultural community plays in nation building. We have liberals that are taking the community and stood by watching them from the wings as they slowly descended into the torrid state. What a humbling, degrading, and humiliating experience for these educated, highly trained, caring, and creative Canadians, with the terrible black eyes of Canadian liberalism. Somewhere along this weary road, we have revoked a surefire response to so committed to the economic payback equation that we have stopped caring about the quality of the lives of our electorate, and the cultural imperative that continues to lie in wait at the very heart of our identity as Canadians. So what can we do? Here's one suggestion. First, let's get rid of the word and the very idea of industry as it relates to cultural products and replace it with the word covenant. A new cultural covenant must be placed before Canadians, one hopes before the next election, a covenant that strongly supports, respects, and puts a priority on, and a challenge to, the Canadian cultural and creative community, so that they can assist us to expedite the strengthening and the habits of our identity and the fortification of our sovereignty. On our part, we must now initiate a proactive policy, a proactive position on cultural policy. Take a hard look at all our cultural assets, decide on what are our cultural priorities as a nation. Then do the unthinkable. Initiate a full audit of these cultural assets and begin the contemplation of a complete realignment of policy and financial resources in the funding of content first and foremost, and then a complete rebuilding of a solid cultural infrastructure to fit a 21st century cultural future. I'm suggesting as a start, and as a basis for some discussion here, that all the financial and tax policy resources be pooled from all the government agencies that have any relationship to the culture. This means those overly protected species and shattered cultural pillars of the CDC, the NFB, Telefilm, the CRTC, External Affairs, Canada Council, Heritage Canada, and the numerous Government of Canada promotion silos. And then, as the government of the day, take the long overdue and sorely needed proactive leadership responsibility and make your fresh, focused, and progressive liberal policy decisions. Then clear away all the jurisdictional obstacles, reapportion pool resources, and any rationalized new funding directly into the appropriate creative and cultural infrastructure of the community. And yes, I mean refocus the current massive expenditures in terms of where we'll do, where it will solidly support primary Canadian creators and interpreters and their cultural advocates institutions, and where it will do the most good for our own cultural pillars, our identity, and finally, of course, our nation.
You have been listening to The Life of a Servant, a Dennis Mills podcast. Visit dennismills.com for more information and archived episodes of this program.